Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today I want to talk about a brand new PS5 heatsink. I say brand new, the ElecGear ELP5C, which again is one of the most uncatchy names I've ever heard, is a heatsink that we've actually been talking about on the channel for about two and a half months. Back when the Sprint PS5 heatsink that we reviewed a little while ago, which was the first PS5 designed heatsink, primarily designed for this system. Back when that was first announced, we were like, ooh, that's cool, am I going to need it? Does it do its job? And at the same similar time that was launched, this device here, the ElecGear, was sort of slightly mentioned online. This is another PS5 designed heatsink with a difference. This one, if anything, is even more involved, stepping outside of the confines of the M2 slot that the SSDs reside inside on this system, and spreading itself out over the internal PS5 system in order to maximize some of that active airflow inside and dissipate the heat from the SSD. Now, one of the main reasons this took so long is when it was first announced, I, like many of us, queried, was it vaporware? Was it a scam? Is it legit? Because it was put on sale in a few select regions of the world, particularly on Amazon, with zero availability for a release date of early December in most cases. And it's worth highlighting as well, even though it hadn't released for a couple of months, there'd already been a review added, which is always super fishy. Anyone that's ever used like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, that sort of stuff, it always feels a bit dodge. But I, like many of you, thought, you know what, you want to know what this looks like? I put my money down, I bought one of these, and here it is. Now in today's video, what we're going to be doing is taking a good close look at this arguably slightly more expensive PS5 heatsink, see what you get for your money, why it says it's different from other heatsinks, where I agree, where I slightly disagree, and a little bit of a summary of our temperature test. Now, if you come to this video specifically for the temperature test on this, that is a much bigger video, and it should be released in the next day or so covering a lot of stuff. That's going to be covering extensive gameplay for a couple of games, heavy write and heavy read. We'll also be comparing it against this, the Eluteng heatsink, the rather budget $10 heatsink that we've featured in other videos, to see where the distinction lies, what's good, what's bad. And I will be referring to some of those results later in this video, but in this video I'm going to be talking about the hardware and some of the images of those temp tests, because there's just so much footage it needs to be its own video. And afterwards there will also be a comparison video between this heatsink, the likes of the WD Black, the Sigafire CUDA 530, the Sprint PS5 heatsink, and the Heatpipe cooler that I mentioned on social media a few days ago that I received out the blue. So let's talk about this. Now, the ElecGear heatsink, because I'm not going with that model name, I hate it, it takes too long to say, I don't get it. This heatsink is pretty high end, both in price and what you're getting. In terms of price, shopping around, it's actually quite different. The lowest price I've seen it knocking around for is about $35 in the US. It's not even available in most of the world, so I can't even give you those prices. I can only knock out a kind of Google price conversion. But in other places outside of Amazon, it's listed for up to about $50. That's a hell of a lot for a heatsink, bearing in mind this is about 10 to 15. This Eluteng one right there, yes, this is built primarily for PC, but people still use it in their PS5s. I know the ambient airflow is very, very different between a PC tower and the PS5, hence why this is designed at all. But still, nonetheless, that's a lot of price difference there. What do you get for your money? Well, let's open this bad boy up and have a look. So, pretty plain box, not really anything to shout out about there. You get yourself a screwdriver. You might need that later on. I'm going to use my own one. You have the heatsink itself. You have a little kit of accessories, and you have your instruction manual. Nothing else there. Now, it's worth highlighting again, I've already conducted all my tests on this utilizing the temperature sensor from previous videos. So again, all of this has been opened already. When you receive it, it will be sealed, obviously. So, first thing we're going to look at, let's have a look at what accessories we get. Because one of the things that really stood out for me early doors on this, and it was slightly mentioned on the eShop blurb, but not really anywhere else. You've got your usual thermal pads that you get, but you get 2 depths of thermal pad. Okay, On top of that, you also receive a foam rising panel here. Bring that up close. And again, there should be an article over on NAS Compares with lots more high-res photography of these items linked in the description. And a copper washer riser. Now, this is something that really only the PC and particularly storage users will largely recognise. Now, ElecGear in their original blurb said as much as they like the PS5 and all the stuff that it does, they feel like the M2 slot inside hasn't really been designed by a full-on storage nerd. And with that, they think that that bay, the way the SSD sits inside, isn't raised up high enough to connect with a heatsink. Also, in the case of double or single-sided SSDs, there's a slight difference on what the padding needs to be underneath. Consequently, their heatsink arrives with a few little extras to rise the SSD up and push it a little harder against this heatsink, which also has a very unique quality compared to a lot of other heatsinks out there. So again, we've got our little riser there, which I'm not going to be using for this video. I'm going to show you in a little while why. But you've also got that little pad to raise it up there and different depth thermal pads there. Very important. Little screwdriver for the installation. The instruction manual is mostly okay when I've glanced at it, but it's one of those ones where the language could have done with a reread afterwards. For example, the copper gasket lifts the left side of the SSD. It's optional if you want it seriously horizontal. That's a strange word to use there, seriously horizontal. But for the most part, pretty good. Let's face it, I can only really speak English, a tiny bit of German, and about 4 words in Taiwanese, so who am I to judge? But here is this heatsink here. It is massive. Just to put that into perspective, that's the Eluteng next to it. Look at the sheer scale of the thing. But the real clues and the thing that makes this stand out are twofold. Firstly, the vents. This heatsink is designed to live outside of the usual M2 slot of your PS5 and capture all of the cool air that's passing through the negative pressure on that system, pulling air through the front of the PS5 and out the back, and this captures all the air through all of those little vents to cool off the heatsink. Remember, this is designed to draw all of the heat away from that SSD, primarily the controller. All of the heat is then in the aluminium and then it's dissipated into the air. That's the whole point of a heatsink there. And they've decided that having it inside there in that little closed bay is not a good idea, which I agree with for the most part. And this allows you to still keep it in that contained area and not interfere with the fan too much, be too high to block it, but at the same time have those little vents to capture all the air throughout. The other thing that makes this SSD heatsink stand out is that on the base, that pipe. That is a copper pipe at 3mm, and that is designed to kind of act, and this is not a great simile, as a heat antenna. So what it's designed to do is when all of that heat is being drawn into this thermal pipe is meant to draw that and basically be able to control where the heat is going. A lot of the time, antennas like this reside outside of the heatsink so that when the heat is being drawn into the heatsink, the copper pipe then acts as a way to draw it out of that. And then the copper pipe, which is far more conductive, is then kept in the pathway of the airflow, and then that gets decreased in temperature because of the active airflow, thereby allowing it to draw more heat away from the heatsink, which is drawing more heat away from the controller. It's a multi-stage process, and much like liquid cooling, is designed to add additional layers of cooling on existing cooling measures and airflow. Now, it's pretty impressive, and although the test results aren't quite on screen yet, and I'll get to those in a little bit, I've got to say, this heatsink certainly did the job, and I think a lot of it is to do with that heat pipe. That heat pipe being a far more conductive surface area to draw the heat away from the components of the SSD, obviously on top of a thermal pad, and then it handing that into the active airflow there of that heatsink there on the top. So now we've seen what the thing looks like, and we've got that design there. Why don't we see how it sits inside the PS5? Now, this is my PS5 over here. Once again, before you put it in the comments, and I know a lot of you have done, again, if you're interested in a PS2 design, there's a whole guide on this over on NAS Compares. I'll hopefully link to it in the description, but otherwise, look up PS2 design, PS5 case shell or whatever on Google. I'm sure that page will turn up. But, so, first thing we need to do is get our cover off. So, if I remove the cover of my PS5 here, we can see, as usual, there is the inside of the PS5. There is our M2 slot there. If we bring it up nice and close, it's got the little cover there. It's got the PS screw there on top of the M2 slot. I will highlight that in preparation for this video, I've already installed an SSD inside here. I'm going to use my own screwdriver. And the SSD I've got inside here is the Team Group T-Force Cardia, the A440. The reason being, and that is the SSD I've utilised for all of the temperature tests, it's because that is an E18 controller with 96 layer 3D TLC NAND, and it's at a decent little price point, and its architecture is utilised by more than 60 to 70% of the SSDs that are supported by this system. On top of that, it also arrives with 2 heatsinks on board, but of course I've not used either of them. So again, I've not run this SSD inside this. I've simply put it inside to demonstrate the heat, where the heatsink would live. There is our panel. Bear in mind, again, very, very small. No dissipation is going to be possible out of that, realistically. And inside is the SSD. So again, I've already applied one of the thermal pads, but if I remove that just gingerly, you can see the SSD inside there. In the middle there is our controller. So let's pop that thermal pad back on there. And then I'll show you guys just how well this heatsink sits. So again, let's put that there. So you can see it nice and close up on camera. So it has the little lip there on the bottom. We angle it, pop it straight into that little lip. Simple as that. Place it on. Never done it at this angle. And there we go. It's lined up. And that is where it sits. That heatsink sits right there inside that bay. Then we take the screw from the PS5 once again. Pop it there on the top. Now again, obviously you're going to install the M2 SSD yourself. I've already done lots of videos on that. So again, installation is very, very quick and easy on that side. But this heatsink is held in simply with the screw that arrives with your PS5. If you're using a chunkier heatsink, or you want to take advantage of some of the riser qualities that are built into this, they are all included to increase the height of that SSD if it's a particularly chunky one, and push it particularly hard against that heatsink there. So there is that heatsink fitting in there absolutely beautifully. And once again, the air is being drawn in from the front on this PS5. It is then being drawn over, then through the vents on that heatsink there, into the fan, which is then drawn into the system, and then the air is pushed out the back of the PS5 there all of the time. That is that negative pressure that this system is built around. If we bring it at an angle, you can see it is not interrupting the flow of the air through the PS5. Have a look at it there. You can see the vents, and if the air was being drawn through that front panel there, as you can see, it doesn't rise up, it doesn't block anything there. So you know, fair play to them. The design of this thing is pretty spot on. Now, if we bring it nice and close to you there on screen so we get the thumbnail sorted. There we go, that was easy, wasn't it? With the air flowing through there, in my original testing when I had this plugged in, I've got to say the results were pretty impressive. Now, to put it into perspective, when we had that Teamforce SSD inside there, a normal SSD, an NVMe SSD, and that particularly PCIe Gen 4 SSDs can get rather hot. Now, in the case of this SSD, it works at its optimal best performance between 30 and 50 C. If you're between those two numbers, that SSD is going to run like a charm. Yes, you can go higher than that, it'll still run fine, but you've got to think about dissipation of heat and the SSD running like a cog in a machine to be able to hand over the heat. Once it exceeds 50, it's still going to run fine, but then you've got to think about that heat that's getting offloaded for dissipation. And the minute you go down that road where it's getting too hot, it gets a lot harder for an SSD to continue offloading that heat successfully into a heatsink. Once an SSD hits around 70C, it begins to throttle. That is when the controller, the brains of the SSD, begin to slow itself down in order to stop it damaging itself, and to the detriment of the durability and the performance of that SSD long term. So those are the kind of confines that we need to work within. So in the case of this SSD here, I ran GTA 5, a number of you must know. We had that game running for 25 minutes. We did two 25-minute tests, and we had two nodes inside here. One node was threaded inside the heatsink underneath, touching directly on top of the controller, underneath the thermal pad, underneath the heatsink. And with that 25-minute test, it went from 26C on the controller up to 28C, with a few decimal places, a rise of only around 1.4C, which was great, and still kept operational temperatures under 30C. When we did the general temperature, which was a second thermometer node here at the bottom to measure the outside air temperature and the ultimate temperature of the system, not the storage, which is just as important, because a cold SSD is worth nothing to you if your GPU, your CPU and your memory is overheating to hell. And in that case, it started at 21C and rose to 22.9C. So a rise of 1.1C overall, which is nothing. It really was really impressive that it was able to maintain that temperature so low during operation of the overall ambient temperature, as well as the internal SSD. The next test on the game we did was on Red Dead Redemption 2, very similar, 25 minutes of just running through the game. Again, we saw a 1.4C rise during that time, and a 0.1C rise on the SSD and then the internal core temperature respectively. And then after that, we did a 350 or so gigabyte write test and then read test. So write, applying 350 odd gig of data to the SSD in games, and in that case it raised 12.1C. It started at 24C, ended at 36C. Remember, write activity raises the temperature generally the highest and the fastest. Depending on the amount of data you're writing, it obviously can only go so high in that time frame before it stops. But a rise of getting up to 36C was incredibly impressive for the SSD, given that we've seen some SSDs like the WD Black with its own heatsink designed around airflow, something that's not really possible in that closed environment, get much higher than that. Now in terms of read, so that's data being read from the SSD and removed. There's still, when the data has been removed, an element of change, if not write, then at least editing the mapped layout of storage. That went from 29 up to 35.6C. Yes, I'm reading from my notes. So an overall rise of just 5.6C. So again, lovely temperature increases there. Definitely nothing to be concerned with. And at no point throughout all of the testing, I think the highest we got, looking at my notes there, was 36C, which some SSDs actually exceed in idle without, with a pretty poor heatsink there. So you can't fault the temperature of this SSD heatsink in the way it was managing it. And even the internal core temperature was still very good for all of our testing. Now, that's a lot of stuff that I like about this heatsink. However, I will say it's still not the best on the market for the money. Because first and foremost, for what you're paying, let's get a little bit relative there. So the stats and numbers I've just mentioned there are very good. They are very good numbers. But they're not out of this world higher than things like the Eluteng. Now the Eluteng, which you'll see in my comparison testing a greater deal of detail, is a lot more back and forth. This is only $10 to $15, so it's more than half the price, and even a third or less of the price in some regions than that heatsink. And the temperature difference between them is single digits, 3, 4, 5 in some cases. Indeed, given how much more this heatsink is within a closed system like the PS5, it seems exceedingly expensive. And remember, bear in mind, they're not the first people to produce a heatsink for the PS5 that's designed for this system. That was Sabrent, and even their heatsink now changes hands for $20 to $25. So for this one to start at $35, yes, with a lot more extras included, is a good thing, but it's still not tippity top, and it's very overkill. Now on the subject of overkill, if it's not already live, there's this, the INEO heatsink. Now if that video's not already live, I hope it will be soon. The lighting in this room is crazy right now. This is the full-on copper pipe heatsink. And again, if that review's not already live, it will be very, very soon. And this heatsink uses an external thermal. This one here, this copper pipe here, that lives inside that slot there. And then this thermal kind of node here, this copper pipe, then captures the air and dissipates the heat out of the heatsink to a new area with a vented design there. Why do I bring up this heatsink in a review of this heatsink? Because this heatsink costs the same as that one. Indeed, in some cases, it's actually less. I've seen it online for about $30 to $35, maxing out about $40 to $45. So it's cheaper than that heatsink. And this, in a lot of cases, kept things cooler than that one. So when it comes to Overkill, it's not even the king of Overkill. It is a very, very good heatsink, and I'm glad I bought it for this review. And I would recommend it, particularly to people that game every day for, you know, a bunch of hours every single day. You get back, you chuck your bag over there, and you game every day. You're a pro sports gamer. It's a very, very effective and very, very efficient heatsink there. But just know you're kind of paying through the nose for it. And given they're not exclusive, when it was first launched, it was an incredibly rare thing, and now there's actually quite a lot of PS5 heatsinks. It slightly undermines its message, and I think it's trying to overcharge for its place in the market that it doesn't have right now. And I think perhaps, maybe at launch, if it took a big price hit, 20 to 30%, then I'd be a lot more enthusiastic about it. But I can't shake this feeling that although in the grand scheme of things, $30 to $50 isn't that much money, you can get heatsinks that do the job close or just as well for a notable degree less, for 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 to 30 to $35 before you hit where this price tag lives. And given the availability of this heatsink isn't exactly global right now, I like it, but a lot of people who like it can't even get hold of it without getting stuck by a $20, $30, $40 delivery fee. I know I did, just to get it for this video. So this is a heatsink. If you're watching this video much later in 2022 or later, if it's dipped in price below the $25 mark, snap it up. It does the job, it fits well, and it's exceptionally well designed and does extra measures there in terms of SSD height. But if you're looking at this SSD heatsink now, at the date of recording in November, December 2021, and the price is still at $35 to $50, depending on where you are, maybe ease off, mate, because I do think it's a little overpriced right now, and it's kind of making itself out to be a lot better than indeed it is. But this has been the hardware review of this, the ElecGear PS5 designed heatsink. The full temperature testing and comparison against the other heatsinks that I've talked about on the channel will be coming very, very soon, all of which measured in the same ways, with the same games, the same amount of data in the same time frame. Do stay tuned for those, because maybe this heatsink will prove me wrong as things go on. But for now, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, click like. It genuinely helps this channel. It helps me understand what I'm doing right and making each video better than the last, and it also makes this channel understand what you guys are interested in. Click subscribe and click the bell to be notified as more content on devices like this go live, and we talk about this very, very often, along with lots of other stuff in data storage. And take advantage of the free advice section linked in the description to NAS Compares. Genuinely free, manned by two humans, me and Eddie the web guy. We don't do anything with your email, it's just there to help people get the right solutions for them. There's a donate button, use it, ignore it, it's up to you. And finally, there should be the full written and heavily photographed review linked in the description as well. If not right this second at the time of release, then in the next day or so. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.